Last time, we talked about some ghost stories that happened in Lan Kwai Fong. This time, we're going even deeper into the strange things around that place. We'll talk about 3 ghost stories about Lan Kwai Fong. The first story happened in a taxi. The main character this time is a taxi driver named Alan. It happened not long after the Lan Kwai Fong crowd crush incident. Even though it shocked the city, people slowly went back to their usual lives. Lan Kwai Fong was still a popular place to drink and hang out at night. One evening, Alan drove his taxi to Lan Kwai Fong, hoping to find some passengers. Alan had a habit, especially when it was around midnight. He usually wouldn't turn on the meter. Instead, he'd quote a price usually 30 to 40% higher than the normal fare. But he was careful. He was always afraid undercover cops might pretend to be customers to catch taxi drivers who don't use the meter. So before picking up anyone, Alan would look carefully to judge whether someone looked like a cop. That night, business was slow. Alan sat in his car smoking while waiting for a fare. It took a while, but finally, he saw a couple waving for a taxi. Alan immediately threw away his cigarette and drove up to them. The woman looked very drunk. Her head was down, and he couldn't see her face clearly. The man, on the other hand, looked totally fine, dressed neatly in a suit and tie. Based on his experience, Alan thought there was no way these two were undercover cops. After all, who would fake being that drunk just to catch a taxi driver? So Alan relaxed and offered them a price a bit higher than usual. The man agreed, and they got in. Their destination was Fanling, about a 40-minute drive from Lan Kwai Fong. Alan was happy this trip would earn him almost double the normal fare. He thought, nice, after this, I can just go home. Right after they got in, the drunk woman spoke up. This car smells really bad, like smoke. Alan didn't say anything. He figured the smell would fade soon enough. But halfway through the ride, the woman spoke again. The smoke smell in here is really bad. This time, Alan replied, sorry, I smoked a few cigarettes earlier while I was waiting for passengers. The man said, it's all right, I don't mind. Alan looked at the rearview mirror again. He saw the woman leaning over, looking really drunk, and worried she might throw up. So he reached for a plastic vomit bag he kept in the car and handed it to them. If either of you feel sick, here's a bag you can use, he said. The man took it and replied, thanks. Just as they were getting close to their destination, the taxi suddenly stalled. The engine just cut off. But Alan had been driving for years. He'd dealt with this kind of thing before, so he calmly restarted the engine. Luckily, the car started again without a problem. He turned around slightly and said, sorry, the car stalled just now. It's fine now. The man said, no worries, just keep going. Then Alan heard the woman say softly, thanks. Finally, they arrived at the drop-off point. Alan turned around, ready to collect the fare, but he only saw the man searching for his wallet. No sound of the door opening. No sound of anyone getting out. The woman was gone. Alan was confused. The woman had been sitting right there. He hadn't heard the door open or close. How did she leave so quietly? So, a bit nervously, Alan asked, did your girlfriend already get out? The man replied, my girlfriend? She's at home waiting for me. Why? Alan stared at him. No, you two got in the car together just now. And your friend even said my car smelled bad. The man froze. Then, without saying another word, he shoved the cash into Alan's hand and quickly left. Didn't even wait for change. Alan grabbed the money, got out of the car, and looked around. Just one person. No sign of the woman. So then, who was the woman sitting in the back seat? Alan couldn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about the ride, the smell of alcohol from the woman, her voice complaining about the smoke, the way she suddenly vanished. He tried to tell himself maybe she had gotten out quietly. Maybe the man was lying. Maybe he'd imagined her voice. But by the second night, he still couldn't explain what had happened. He kept driving, kept thinking, trying to come up with any reason to comfort himself. He sat in the taxi, chain smoking, going over the whole thing in his mind again and again. And then, he heard it. Her voice. The same voice from the night before. "You never listened. I told you so many times. This taxi smells disgusting because of your smoking." Alan froze. He turned around slowly. She was there. The same woman from that night. Sitting in the back seat. Staring at him with a cold, angry expression. Alan jumped out of the car. He didn't even close the door. He ran far down the road and looked back. She was still there. He didn't dare go near the taxi again that night. He just left it parked by the side of the road until morning. The next day, Alan went to a temple. He asked for a protective talisman, something to keep spirits away. He placed it in his car. And after that, she never came back. Or at least, he never saw her again. But just to be safe, Alan never smoked in his car again. And he never went back to Lan Kwai Fong to pick up passengers. So, if you ever ride a taxi in Hong Kong, and you notice the dashboard is covered with little statues, charms, and talismans, now you know why. The next story really happened inside one of the bars in Lan Kwai Fong. This time, the main character is a guy named Peter. One night, Peter went drinking with 7 of his friends. A total of 8 people. They didn't book a table in advance. And since it was a Friday night, Lan Kwai Fong was packed. They had no choice but to wait outside the bar, hoping a big enough table would become available. Because they had 8 people, they needed one of the large tables, so the wait was long. Then Peter noticed something strange inside the bar. There was clearly a large table that was completely empty. He asked the staff why they couldn't sit there. The staff replied, "That table is reserved." Peter wasn't happy about that. Right around that time, 2 of the girls in their group said they had to leave for something urgent. So the group went from 8 people down to 6. The staff said, "Actually, we've just had a 6-person table open up. Do you want to come in now?" Of course, Peter and the others said yes and went inside. Not long after they sat down, Peter looked over and saw that the big table, the one that was empty earlier, now had someone sitting at it. But it was just one woman, sitting alone. Peter got annoyed again and went back to the staff. "Why did you let just one person take that big table? Why not let us use it earlier?" He demanded to speak to the manager. As he started to get frustrated, the manager came over and said quietly, "Let's talk over here, away from the others." They stepped aside, and the manager said something unexpected. "You really don't want to sit at that table?" Peter replied, "Why not? We're paying like everyone else." The manager looked at him and said, "If you're not afraid, I can tell you the real reason." He explained the woman currently sitting at that big table is a regular customer. She used to always come with her boyfriend. Then one day, they agreed to meet at the bar like usual, but her boyfriend never showed up. At first, the staff thought maybe they had broken up. But then something strange started happening. Every now and then, they would still see the boyfriend, sitting silently at that same table, not drinking, not speaking, just sitting there. Eventually, one of the staff asked the woman what happened. Why wasn't her boyfriend coming with her anymore? The woman quietly said, "He died. A traffic accident. It happened a while ago." The staff were shocked they had still seen him after his death. So from that point on, every time the woman came to the bar, they would always leave that big table open for her. No one knows if the woman can still see him. But the staff? They've seen him. The manager looked at Peter and said, "If you're okay with it, I can switch your table. But if anything strange happens, we won't be responsible." Peter didn't believe the story, but he also didn't want to upset the woman. So in the end, he stayed at his table. He went back to his friends and tried to act like nothing happened. But a while later, he couldn't help glancing back at the big table, the one that earlier had only the woman sitting there. This time, it was different. There was a man sitting next to her now, expressionless, staring directly at Peter. And then, he raised his hand and waved. Peter froze. Somehow, he just knew. That was her dead boyfriend. He grabbed his jacket, told his friends, "I've got something urgent. Gotta go." And he left, didn't look back. Later that night, Peter got home, still feeling uneasy. He walked to the elevator in his building. The doors slid open. Empty. He stepped forward, then stopped. The elevator had a large mirror covering the back wall. And in that mirror, he saw someone standing inside. A man, with his back to the door. The man slowly turned around, looked Peter in the eye, and gave a faint smile. Then he spoke.
"Next time we can sit together. It's fine."
The voice wasn't loud, but Peter heard it inside his head, clear and slow, like it had been waiting. Peter didn't hesitate. He ran. The elevator doors closed behind him, and the man was still there in the mirror, unmoving. Lan Kwai Fong isn't just full of restaurants and bars. There are also many discos and clubs. And of course, a lot of guys go there for one reason: to meet girls. This next story happened inside a disco. The main character this time is Mike. About a year after the Lan Kwai Fong crowd crush tragedy, Mike and two of his friends went clubbing there one night. The three of them had the same goal: meet girls. The moment they entered the disco, Mike suddenly shouted, "Wow, there are so many ghosts here." His two friends were shocked. "Wait, you can see ghosts?" Mike laughed. No, I meant all the foreigners." In Cantonese, foreigners are sometimes called Gui Lo or Gui Mui, words that sound like ghost man or ghost woman. So the three split up to see who could meet a girl first. Not long after, Mike saw someone, a woman with long hair, wearing a red top, standing in a dark corner, back facing him. Even though he couldn't see her face, her figure looked great. So Mike walked over to talk to her. When he got close, he realized the woman was actually quite short. But up close, she was pretty. They started dancing together, even getting a bit intimate. After a while, the woman said she was going to the washroom. Mike thought this might lead to something more, so he followed her. On the way to the washroom, he bumped into one of his friends. "I just met this girl," Mike said. "We're heading to the toilet together." His friend asked, "Which girl?" Mike pointed ahead. "The one in red." But his friend looked confused. "I don't see anyone wearing red." Mike said, "Maybe she's short, someone's blocking your view." Then he kept walking after her. But once he got inside the washroom, the girl was gone. He looked everywhere, no sign of her. So he went back to the dance floor to look again. And there she was, dancing in the crowd, like nothing happened. He walked up to her and asked, "What's going on?" She smiled and said, "Let's go somewhere else. Maybe rest at a hotel." Mike said sure, but first, he wanted to tell his friends. Right then, someone tapped him on the shoulder. It was his friend again. "Hey, what are you doing? We've been watching you talk to yourself all night." Mike said, "What do you mean? I just met a girl. You saw her." He turned around to show them. But the girl in red was gone. His friend laughed. "You've been dancing and talking by yourself this whole time. What girl?" Mike was frustrated. He thought his friend must have scared her away. So after a bit more partying, Mike and his two friends left the disco. Outside on the street, Mike still looked around, hoping to see the girl again. And then he saw her. The same woman in red. She was standing under a street lamp across the road. She turned and looked at him, then waved. Mike's heart jumped. He started running toward her. But halfway across the street, he suddenly stopped. Because he finally saw why she looked so short. From the knees down, she had no legs. Only two bloody thighs, standing on the pavement, dripping with blood. Mike froze. Then, "Mike, watch out!" his friends shouted. Too late. A car slammed into him and sent him flying. His friends immediately called an ambulance. Mike was sent to the ICU. He stayed unconscious for 10 days. When he finally woke up, he told his friends everything. They said, "That night, we only saw you run into the street and stop. We never saw any woman in red." It was at that moment Mike finally understood. That girl in red was never human. So, what do you think? 3 different stories point 3 different people. All in the same place. Lan Kwai Fong. A taxi ride that ended with a missing passenger. And a driver who still hears her voice. A romantic night out. Shadowed by a woman who may have been drinking alone. Or maybe not alone at all. And a club encounter that led to a horrifying truth. Standing right in the middle of the road. They all came looking for fun, for escape, for connection. But something else found them instead. Lan Kwai Fong might be full of lights, music, and laughter. But in the corners, the reflections, the in-between moments, something waits. And once it sees you, you might see it too.